I'm Greg Tepper. That's Greg Powers. And this is This Week
in Cruton.
Greg Powers, the next level athlete, joins us, as he always does, every Wednesday for This Week in Recruiting. A lot to get to here. We will start. You've made him our prospect on the rise. It's Crockett 20 tight end Alan Horace, who is certainly a physical specimen, 6'5", 235. He is in the news not only because he's a great player, but he is one of 7 guys that, as of this moment, at 12:08 p.m. on November 13th, has decommitted from Arkansas after Arkansas fired Chad Morris after their loss to Western Kentucky. So they have lost 7 commitments. That is not necessarily a surprise. I know that whenever you fire a coach, you have this kind of churn. A lot of these guys will hurt. Unsurprisingly, Chandler Morris decommitted from Highland Park. But I will tell you that Alan Horace, of course, probably a name that people may not know, who certainly looks the part.
And this is kind of like a mixed bag prospect on the rise. To be more specific, that was 7 Texas high school football players who decommitted from Arkansas in the wake of that Chad Morris firing. Horace was kind of my pick for prospect on the rise because in the wake of his decommitment to go back in, and of course, we were doing a lot of profiles for DCTF Rising that's set to come out in December. So I watched his tape again over the weekend, and really he played at a very high level his senior year. He's the number 78 prospect right now in the top 100. I could see him sliding up because he's number 5 in the tight end rankings right now, and he's like behind guys like Brandon Frazier, who also decommitted from Arkansas, Blake Smith, Jalen Conyers at Groover. There are names like that who are in front of him, but out of all those guys, he may be the most athletic, and he might have the most NFL potential out of that group.
Well, the size alone, 6'5", 235. That plays in college right now. You know what I mean? Like, he could walk onto a college football field and from a size perspective not stand out.
Well, we watched the first highlight clip that rolled here was him making a leaping grab in the end zone, and we first kind of saw that in the state 7-on-7 tournament this year where he was able to take over some games there. But he's an extremely athletic pass catcher who looks the part, and he's long-armed and he's big-framed, and he's just a good football player. So it would not be a surprise as we make I think we've got maybe 2 more official rankings tweaks to that top 100 scheduled before the final signing day in February. It wouldn't be a surprise to see him slide up that list this year before it's all said and done. So that's why he's a prospect on the rise. And then we could also talk a little bit more about these decommitments.
Well, and that's the thing. So the decommitments, the list reads Alan Horace, quarterback Chandler Morris from Highland Park. That's not a surprise. That's Chad Morris's son. It's hard to imagine he's going to stay committed to Arkansas when they just fired his dad. Another tight end in McKinney Norris, Brandon Frazier. Carthage wide receiver Kelvonte Dixon. That's a pretty heavy hitter there. Mason Mangum, the wide receiver from Austin Westlake. John Gentry, the running back from North Shore. That's not Zachary Evans, but is, when John Gentry's really good.
Right. No, he'd be starting in every other program.
Basically every other program, maybe like... who's the second best running back in the state?
Well, he's probably behind the top. He would be behind Jace McClellan, Seth McGowan. Those guys are like top 10. But that's it.
Yeah. And then Savion Williams, the wide receiver from Marshall. A lot of East Texas flair, and DFW flair and Austin flair, because those are the places that Chad Morris has some pull there. Obviously, this is going to be a developing story in the recruiting world as far as how this shakes out. It's not a surprise that they have a bunch of decommits with a coach getting fired. But suddenly, if you are some of these guys who have offered these kids and they're back on the market, their phones are going to start blowing up again.
And something interesting to watch is former Gilmer head coach, Texas assistant, SMU assistant, and now Arkansas assistant Jeff Traylor is known to be one of the best Texas high school football recruiting guys in the country. And who turns up the heat and comes after Jeff Traylor? Does the new hire there try to solidify him on that staff, or does that open the doors for some other schools to possibly come in and hire who is basically a recruiting savant?
Yeah.
That guy is nails when it comes to especially recruiting East Texas.
He's an ace. He's a recruiting ace in the same way that like Baylor hired Joey McGuire to be a recruiting ace. down in Houston when they hired Corby Meekins to be their recruiting ace. These guys who have these deep ties to Texas that can walk into any coach's office in the state and say, hey, tell me about your kid, and let's talk about how we can get him out to where we're playing.
And what's interesting about Traylor is you see his stamp on all these programs still. Brandon Jones at Texas is one of the guys who's playing at a high level, and then he's got guys at SMU who are still playing there. And now as he's leaving Arkansas from their class that they signed last year, I think that he's going to have an impression on what the future of that team is. So who wouldn't want to hire that guy?
Let's get to our commit of the week. Our commit of the week is Dajon Harrison, the wide receiver from Hutto. Surprise, surprise, Hutto's got another kid. and DFW, or rather Tom Herman, has sealed the borders around Austin in that regard, has kind of made sure that he keeps local kids local. Dajon Harrison, the wide receiver from Hutto, is certainly a guy who can play, I think, both sides of the ball. But what do you think about Dajon Harrison?
Well, look at his tape right here, and what he's done is he's continued to improve each and every rep of his high school career. He's playing at a very high level as a senior. I think that's kind of what led to this commitment, and Texas refocus on him to bring him in to this class is potentially versatility. You touched on it. He could play on either side of the football, but he's electric with the football in his hands. He's got great agility and make-a-miss ability in the open field. Very good pass catcher. That probably translates well to the defensive side of the football where these guys are harder to find. He closes on the ball in a flash and has that hip flexibility that you're really looking for. I think that the coordinators there will have a little bit of a battle and a discussion about what position fits him best, but I think that he's been kind of picked out to play some receiver for them, but if it doesn't work out, don't be surprised if it's defense.
Let's get to our underclassmen of the week. I was laying out capsules for the 2019 recruiting edition of Dave Campbell's Texas Football, which goes to press next week. I was laying those out last week, and I laid out the name of Dallas Skyline 2021 wide receiver QuayDarius Davis. Texas picks up a wide receiver in Dajon Harrison for 2020. They lose a wide receiver for 2021. QuayDarius Davis has decommitted from Texas. He's making a habit of this. He also decommitted from SMU a couple of weeks ago or earlier. But QuayDarius Davis has offers from all over, and wherever he goes, he's going to be an impact player.
Well, he is one of these wide receivers who plays with an edge, and he brings that on the field and off the field. He's a guy who has a lot of passion. He's a big playmaker. As a matter of fact, he may have had the best catch in the state this year on a one-handed grab in one of his games early. I can't remember who they were playing off the top of my head, but it was like a viral or big moment where he was able to go up with one hand and snag the football out of the air. And didn't really kind of talk about this in the blurb that we wrote about Quay and his decommitment from Texas, but an interesting fact is that Rashad Samples was probably kind of responsible for his recruitment initially at Texas, who is now an assistant coach at SMU. Quay Davis was at one time committed to SMU before Rashad Samples was there. So that's potentially something to watch. SMU's had a great year on the football field. They've landed some solid recruits, but if they can get back in on a guy like Quay Davis and entice him to come back into the fold as a commitment, you're talking about a top 100 national guy that could potentially end up at a school like SMU. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm just saying it's something to watch because of the relationship.
Right. He's certainly got the size there. It's 6 foot, 185 pounds. And a bigger wide receiver there.
I have a question real fast that I don't know. Is there like a maximum number of time that you can decommit somewhere?
Nope.
Like, no, you can just I'll leave
it to the recruiting expert, but no, you can commit and decommit every single day if you'd like.
If you wanted to, and schools would still take your commitment at some point.
Yes.
You'll probably lose some interest in the wake of that, but until your name is inked on a letter of intent, you can verbal commit as much as you want. We like to describe it as a non-binding verbal pledge.
Yes, verbal commitments are non-binding. That is it's so. And I don't know. We can get into a talk about how much that drives me nuts, but
right.
I don't know what the record is, but there was a safety. And I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I think he played at Wichita Falls Rider, and he switched back and forth between. He was a bit Markel. He went to Oklahoma State. He was a big-time safety. Markel Martin, maybe. He switched back and forth between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State like 3 or 4 times.
That's frustrating for them.
Yes, most definitely. Finally, let's get to our Recruit of the Week with Greg Powers, Next Level Athlete. Follow him on Twitter at GPowerScout. Follow Next Level Athlete on Twitter at NextLevelD1. Our Recruit of the Week, Lindale out east, they got an outstanding running back in Jordan Jenkins. Big game this week against Lamar Consolidated, but this guy ran for 8 rushing touchdowns in their big win over Jacksonville last week. He's already got offers from Baylor, Arkansas, BYU, and Louisiana Monroe. 2021 kid, seems like the momentum on recruiting is just getting going for him.
I really, really like this kid's tape whenever I was watching. Does a lot of different things. They use him in the return game. As a matter of fact, he was nominated for Mr. Texas Football Player of the Week last week, and he had a better game this week, scoring 8 touchdowns in the historic Tomato Bowl, no less. So,
nice.
I mean, that's awesome that he was able to use that
really
stage.
renovated.
And they have a big playoff game this week, which will pit 2 excellent running backs against each other when you have Jordan Jenkins from Lindale squaring off against Lamar Consolidated's Tay McWilliams. And that game's at Traylor Stadium in Rosenberg in the 582 playoffs, and I think that's one to watch because that's probably, I don't know, what's the line on that one, I would guess. It should be a pretty entertaining game, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. I believe Lamar Consolidated is like a 6 or 7 point favorite.
So
it's a 10. They're 10-point favorites, but
but it's a game that's possibly winnable for Lindale.
And we've got an article coming up here on TexasFootball.com in which Ishmael Johnson and I identify some upset alerts. So there is that. Finally, let's get to our This Week in Recruiting Game of the Week. It's the Colony and Lancaster, 2 programs we've talked about before on this segment. And here in the DFW Metroplex, big-time matchup. I think we'll have a DCTF presence there. But I mean, from a high school football perspective, it's awesome. From a recruiting perspective, it's awesome. There's just a lot to like about this game.
I think both myself and Matt Stepp will be at the game on Thursday, and it's probably the premier game on the Thursday slate,
at least in DFW. Yeah.
in the area. So there's just a ton of recruits. Trey Bradford is obviously the headliner. He has yet to make his college commitment. He's considering schools, like LSU, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Nebraska. Don't be surprised if he ends up in Big Ten country, especially if LSU is able to secure a commitment from Zachary Evans, which is kind of like the buzz, I think, right now, is a lot of people really feeling LSU and the Tigers in the Zachary Evans recruitment. But many more players from that, especially 2023 running back Camden Wesley, who leads that team, who leads the Colony in rushing as his counterpart on the opposite side of the football, and Keith Miller, big-time wide receiver prospect, committed to Colorado. Can the Colony knock off Lancaster? I know Lancaster's the favorite.
I think it's going to be a really good game. I think that Lancaster's your favorite, but I think that it would not be a surprise if that game is a one-score game into the fourth quarter. I think that's a really, really interesting match.
Well, it's going to be a heavyweight match.
Yeah, absolutely.
I saw Coach Rangel give a pregame speech one time. Man, I was ready to run through a brick wall. So expect that from the Colony.
Yeah, exactly.
The Colony is always a hard-nosed football team, and nothing's different this year. This is their most talented team ever since I've been covering high school football in Texas over the last 10 or 12 years. This is their most talented team.
He is Greg Powers, Next Level Athlete. Follow him on Twitter at GPowersScout. Follow Next Level Athlete on Twitter at Next Level D1. Powers, appreciate it. We'll do it again next week.
Let's do it.